So we are not in the normal studio, and I am not in my normal shirt. Now, I said when we hit 1,000 subscribers, I'll be doing a full-on reptile room tour, which is true. This is not going to be a reptile room tour. I think right now, as the filming of this video, we're about 8 away from 200. So hopefully this video hits us to over 200, but we're not doing a reptile room tour today. Today, we are talking about Norman, my Argentine black and white Tegu, who is probably the most popular animal I bring to my programs, and he's also the largest animal that I own, and he's one of the first animals I've ever had. I've had Norman since he was super tiny. Now, Norman has been living in a 4x8 foot by 4 foot enclosure that we built here. It's made out of wood, 2x4s and sheets of wood and stuff like that, and we insulated it with styrofoam sheets. Because Norman was one of my first animals, so he was actually down here before the reptile room existed, and downstairs down here, it gets a little chilly in the winter, so we insulated it and put 24-hour heating in there. And now the reptile room stays a very nice temperature, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. And it doesn't hold humidity quite as well as I would have wanted. And because of how we built this thing like a solid tank, like so I could put other heavy enclosures on top of it. And with that, it meant that the walls were very thick and that we actually had to rest them on the base. So the floor space is not a true 4x8. He loses about half a foot on each side of the enclosure. He loses half a foot on the width and half a foot on the length. So what we ordered was a custom T100 by Animal Plastics. It's a 4x8 by 4 foot enclosure made out of PVC. So it doesn't have those super thick walls like what we built. So he will have a true 4x8 foot enclosure all to himself, made out of PVC. Now I say custom because normally the T100 has a larger viewing window than what this one has. But for this one, I actually had the viewing window on it raised about 6 inches. So the viewing window is not as big as your typical T100, but I wanted that extra 6 inches so I could fit even more substrate in there, just because with the normal viewing window, I wasn't going to be able to get the substrate depth that I wanted and then that Tegus really need. This is my first time ever ordering from Animal Plastics or really any big PVC lizard enclosure or anything like that. I mean, I've built I built 4 big lizard enclosures and stuff out of wood before, so I'm pretty kind of comfortable with doing it in-house and buying the supplies and putting it together ourselves. But this is my first time ever doing this, so we're going to compare the two, and I'm going to kind of talk about if I'm going to kind of keep doing this in the future or if I'm going to go back to kind of building wood enclosures on my own and sealing them up that way. So we're going to talk about what I did, we're going to talk about how I did it. I'm going to try and go as step-by-step in process as I can. So the first thing we did was build a base because I did not want the enclosure sitting on the ground. The floor down here is cement, which is really easy for cleaning, but it's kind of cold. So I wanted it up off the ground. I also want to be able to move it because just about everything in this reptile room, for the most part, is on wheels. Even the super heavy duty cages that I built before, they're all on wheels. So we laid out 2 8-foot 2x4s. And then between those, we took 7 cut down 2x4s and we screwed those every 16 inches to make a very solid rectangle. Because a 2x4, when you stand up on its side, it's 1.5 inches wide. So when you have that, and we cut the 7 pieces to be 45 inches long to make that perfect 48 inches. And then we just used, I believe it was 2.5-inch screws to screw the whole thing together. So the next step was to put the wheels on. So I went to Home Depot and I got some very heavy duty caster wheels. I believe they are each graded for 250 pounds. And we put 1 at each corner, and then we put 2 directly in the center opposite each other. One of my first kind of learnings with building my own cage was one of the cages that I built, I didn't have heavy enough casters, so when we tried to move it, 2 of the wheels snapped off, and it was very hard to try and replace those while the enclosure already has dirt and animal and everything in it. So we just went for super heavy duty from the get-go. So with the tires going on each corner in the center, they weren't going to fit on the regular 2x4, so we actually had to screw in some additional ones, and we made sure those suckers were really secure so that way that there was no braking or shifting or anything like that. And then with each of those tires, there was 4 holes in the metal plate where you were to kind of anchor it down. So we took a drill and we drilled pilot holes, and what we did was we just put these lag bolts in. They were a little bit bigger than this one. We put the lag bolts in, and then you just use a regular socket wrench, and then we just kind of twisted it into place, and then as you twist that down, that sucker stays in there really tight. And like I said, we used bigger ones than this, so I didn't need to worry about a wash or anything like that. Those tires are super secure. And then the last step for the base was to flip it over, and then we had a 4x8 foot sheet of plywood that we just put on it. We just took some, I think it was 1.5 or 2-inch screws, and we went down the sides, we went down those middle supports, and we screwed the entire thing into that base. And then the base was done. And then came building the actual enclosure. Now this is my first time time, like I said, over ordering like a giant cage that I had to kind of build myself. Luckily, Animal Plaxis sent a whole sheet of instructions, what to do, what order to do it in, things like that. So we had this whole 4x8 built in about an hour, a little over that with some of the other things that we did. The first thing we did was just put the base down. Now, each panel that you have of this enclosure, it all has a sticker telling you what way is front, what way is top, things like that. So really every way that you would have questions, Animal Plaxis has basically been trying to help you along. So it was really handy, but we put the bottom down, and then the next step was actually to take the sides, stand those up, and then screw them along the bottom. So you basically end up with a very wide U because the walls are kind of standing flimsily. You don't want to trust them 100% yet, but the walls were standing on their ends attached to the base. Next up was the back and the sides. Now, Animal Plastics has really kind of specific instructions. You're not supposed to screw anything besides the sides into the bottom, and I'll talk about that why in a second, but you screw the back along the sides, and then you screw the front along the sides. Now, remember, the front is going to be the one with that giant open viewing window, and how we built it, we actually had to rotate the entire enclosure when we actually had it in, which we had the space to do, so it wasn't a problem. But now, normally, there's not a whole lot of space in the reptile room. Next up was the top. Now with the top, I actually had a custom 20-inch by 12-inch mesh window screen put in on the basking side, and they have all these different kind of customizations and things you want with lighting and all that stuff. So when the top was on, we screwed it all the way in, all the way around. Now besides the sides, this is so far the only piece that is fully screwed in and anchored in, and there's a reason for that, because remember, the back and the front aren't screwed into the bottom. The only thing holding the bottom in place are the sides. And we had to do this because the next step, and this was probably the biggest pain in the entire build, but you do this because the next step is to flip the entire cage upside down, which means you rotate it once, rotate it again, so that the top is actually sitting on the bottom and the bottom is pointing up, so that you can actually screw and anchor the bottom in with everything sitting in place and gravity kind of helping push it all down. And then you have the fun job of rotating the entire thing back right side up. And this is a two-person job. With a cage this big, with a smaller one you could get away with a one-person thing, obviously, if it was just like a 4x1 or something like that. But my dad helped me with this because it was very awkward, it was very hard, because again, PVC isn't heavy per se, but I mean, a few sheets of it all screwed together is pretty heavy, but it's just a big, very awkward, like not easy to manage cage to rotate around. So once we finally had it all back to normal with the bottom on the bottom and the top on the top, we actually had to take the top back off. And you had to do this because then you had to put the supports in. Now there's like this weird upside down U that's your central support, and that goes all the way to the ground. And then about halfway down each side you have a straight vertical bar that just goes straight across. So we screwed those in, made sure those were all secure, and then we put the top back on, screwed it all in, and the cage was finally done for now. Because the actual building of the enclosure is done, really. I mean, other than putting in the glass doors, there's really nothing else left to do. But you have to put the silicone in. Animal Plastics sends a little bag of screws you need and a little thing of silicone, so that way you can actually go around on the inside edge of the enclosure and silicone it. That way water and humidity and stuff doesn't leak out, because the bottom, remember the base of this is just regular plywood, so we don't want it leaking, and you don't want water if there's a spill or anything leaking out, because some of you might have this on carpeted floors or hardwood floors or whatever, so you want to keep that all inside. So what we did was you basically just put a bead of silicone along the bottom, you take like a plastic glove or something, or you can even use a plastic bag, use your finger and you just push it along that seam, really get it in there. And then we did about 2 foot up on each of the sides too, because the substrate's not going all the way to the ceiling, so I didn't need to worry about doing that all the way up. Now silicone, you do not want to breathe it in, and you also need to let it air out for about a week at least. So once we did this part, and this was a few weeks ago, remember, once we did this part, I couldn't put Norman in if I wanted to for at least a week, week and a half while this silicone aired out. So I left the window of the reptile room open during the day when I could to kind of help air that process out. Now it's not anything that was going to be a lethal off-gassing that would kill all the other animals in there, so I wasn't worried about that, but it was a noticeable smell if you stuck your head in the enclosure. So basically you wanted to wait until that smell went away. And then after about a week and a half, once the silicone was cured, I could start worrying about moving the dirt in and furnishing the enclosure. So now we're going to cut back in time to Adam from about 2 weeks ago loading in the dirt, and he was not having a good time. Well, it is, I don't know, some morning. The days have all blurred together. It is some morning, and I am going to have to unload a bunch of topsoil, and this is probably going to be the first of 2 or 3 trips. So I'm going to unload all that downstairs and put it into the new cage. So I will talk to you when I am out of breath done with that. So I didn't end up filming anymore yesterday. I had to move, let's see, what was it? It ended up being something like 32 bags of topsoil, 4 bags of sand. There's some peat moss and some other odd and end stuff. But yeah, so there's a lot of moving things downstairs yesterday. So I was just tired and I didn't film anymore. But we are in the reptile room now. No, I'm not going to show around, but I will go to Norman's. Okay, so everything is siliconed and sealed, and it's probably hard to tell, but that right there, that pile of dirt is probably about 2.5 feet tall in the middle, and you'll be able to see it better once I move the lighting and everything. Next up, I had to actually move all the dirt to the side because the basking platform that I built for him, I realized is actually too big to put in here because I was dumb. It was too big to get in here, so I have to screw the legs on inside this, which that'll be fun. So this is the basking platform. It's in pieces right now. So you've got the main shelf right there, and then these are the legs. So the legs are going to go lengthwise underneath, kind of like an upside down U. I'm going to screw those in the enclosure. Whew. Okay, so that was not easy. I actually had to screw one side of the legs in outside and the other side inside because it wasn't going to all fit with how big this is. So I just screwed it all in. It's all done and in place. It's sitting on the floor, filling dirt underneath. He can sleep under there. He'll climb up on top of here. And then I took some dry lock and I touched up the screws and some of the odd and end bits that I might have nicked when I was screwing the top to the legs. And dry lock, that's all this is right here. It's just a waterproofer. It's really meant for concrete. You kind of void the warranty when you do it on wood, but whatever. And I'm sure there's going to be some gaps and stuff that I miss, but this doesn't need to last forever. It's not like I'm dry locking like an actual enclosure. So with the basking platform done and all that dirt finally in there, I could actually finally start putting his plants in. I put some of his logs and other kind of odd and end things, his hide, his giant water bowl. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to take you guys inside the reptile room into the back corner because that's where he is, and I'm going to show you guys what the finished enclosure looks like. So we are here with Norman in his new 4x8 foot enclosure. Like you guys saw, I built him a ramp out of some logs that we cut. I put his new live plants in there, got a stump in here, his new water bowl, his hide. I mean, he seems to really be digging it. He's been moving around, he's been moving dirt a lot. He's been kind of flattening out and getting used to his new home. For a while, I did experiment with having different kinds of patio block and things right here. I actually upgraded him to a 160 watt mega ray. So that way it kicks out even more heat. And now that basking temperature on these nice, cool, flooring tiles. Oh, I used the tongs. He smells the food. On these nice new flooring tiles that I got right here, basking temp gets to a very, very nice 120 to 130 usually. So we're gonna feed him some while he kind of hangs out in his new home. You want some salmon? So yeah, so I mean, this thing holds humidity really well. It's holding the heat really well. I'm really happy with it, honestly. It was really easy for me to put together. It's been like, I don't know. It's been so much quicker and faster than I thought it was going to be. Like I told you guys before, I was really worried about having to deal with kind of building a cage that I did not build myself. You want strawberry? Yeah. So honestly, what I think I'm just going to do from here on out is I'm just going to be doing this, because this has just been, it was so easy. I put it together in an hour. I mean, outside of the time to silicone, it really wasn't that bad. I mean, I did the basking platform and I did this myself, but if you don't do this, I think they even have an option where you can get a smaller one put in. I just wanted something that was even bigger. So it's been so much easier than like what I used to do was, and I'm going to be doing a video kind of comparing PVC versus the home built ones that I built. It's so much easier, because with those ones I'd have to build each panel and it took forever. And now right now with quarantine, I mean, would have the time, but with how busy I've been with shows before this all hit, it's just, I did not have the time to do that anymore. That's what kind of drove me to try buying these in the first place. So, but yeah, I've been noticing him moving around a lot more. He's using the verticality in this enclosure a lot more. I wasn't sure on the ramp, but I've seen him up here climbing it. Granted, he's not the most graceful with it, and I think he's just really kind of enjoying the new space. He's enjoying the higher heat that this thing holds. There's a good boy. And I mean, his old enclosure, it wasn't bad, it just wasn't ideal. I actually moved Charlie into his old enclosure after sprucing it up a little bit, because it's easier to do renovations when an animal's not in it, but I'll talk about those. And there's actually a few updates I want to be doing to this one that I'm going to talk about in a future kind of mini reptile room update. We're going to talk about some of the animals that I rotated around once I had that enclosure opened up, and then Charlie's old enclosure open up, and then I actually have another one of these T100s that I'm building right now. So we're going to be doing a separate video talking about the updates, because there's a few things I want to add to this. One of which is I'm going to add even more substrate. I know I already added like 40 bags, if not more, of sand and substrate. So I'm going to add even more. I'm going to add even more substrate to it. I'm also going to be adding a 3-foot UV light right over here along this way, so that these plants can get more UV. And also that way he can just kind of get more UV kind of dappled throughout his entire enclosure, rather than just the basking spot. There's a good boy. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you have any questions about building this cage or Norman or really anything else, feel free to shoot them out in the comments. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on that future reptile room update video I talk about, where we're going to be talking about all the big lizards and all their enclosure movements and things like that. Make sure you don't miss out on the updates to this enclosure I'm going to be doing. You don't miss the reptile room tour when we finally hit that 1,000 subscribers. Make sure you like the video if you enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll catch you later.